Scene 1 introduces Charlotte, Jane, Serene, and Vanna in a domestic space that feels a touch emotionally crowded even before anything is spoken, using quiet tension rather than action to show how relationships between women can fray, overlap, and complicate one another over time. Charlotte and Jane share a home with Serene, and the film immediately establishes that Charlotte and Jane were once deeply close, the kind of closeness that queer women recognize as formative, emotionally intimate, and difficult to replicate later. Yet that bond has shifted into something brittle and unresolved. Charlotte's impulsive act of taking off with something Jane demands back is not just conflict but avoidance, a refusal to stay present in a space where unspoken feelings linger. And her departure leaves Jane holding more than frustration, holding grief for a closeness that no longer feels accessible. Jane's glance toward Charlotte, brief but weighted, captures a familiar queer experience, the moment of recognition that feelings have not disappeared simply because circumstances have changed, and that desire, attachment, or resentment can persist even when one tries to move on. When Vanna arrives, Jane's girlfriend, the emotional contrast becomes sharper, as Vanna represents safety, availability, and an outlet for Jane's tension. Yet Jane's mind is still occupied by Charlotte's absence, revealing how past connections can haunt present relationships. For lesbian audiences, this dynamic resonates deeply, reflecting how queer women often build intense, early bonds that shape later intimacy. Serene's presence in the household adds another layer, functioning as a quiet witness to the emotional undercurrents, embodying the way shared spaces can hold histories that everyone feels but no one names. Jane's desire to focus her attention on Vanna is framed not as shallow or impulsive, but as an attempt to ground herself in the present, to choose a relationship that offers mutual care rather than unresolved longing. This tension speaks to broader themes of repression and emotional safety, where women learn to redirect their feelings rather than confront them directly, especially when queer desire feels inconvenient or destabilizing. The scene subtly challenges society's discomfort with women loving women by refusing to sensationalize intimacy, instead portraying it as emotionally complex, sometimes messy, and deeply human. Charlotte, Jane, Serene, and Vanna each represent different strategies for survival within queer relationships, mirroring real-world pressure queer women face to minimize feelings, justify attachments, and move forward without closure, while longing remains quietly unresolved for everyone. Scene 2 unfolds with a quiet ache that feels intimately familiar to queer audiences, as Charlotte reaches out to Jane not in anger but in vulnerability, offering reconciliation as a way to preserve what once mattered between them. And Jane's refusal lands not as cruelty but as self-protection, a boundary drawn by someone who has been hurt too many times to reopen a door she's worked hard to close. The rejection cuts deeply for Charlotte, and the film allows that pain to linger rather than rushing past it, showing how queer women often experience emotional loss not just as heartbreak but as dislocation, the sudden absence of someone who once felt like home. In the aftermath, Charlotte turns to Serene, and this shift is significant because Serene has long existed in the emotional margins, present but restrained, aware of her feelings yet determined to keep them contained. When Charlotte seeks comfort, it is not framed as manipulation or seduction, but as a human need for closeness, for reassurance that she is not alone in her hurt. And Serene's initial withdrawal reflects an internal conflict many queer women recognize, the tension between desire and responsibility, between what feels right emotionally and what feels forbidden by circumstance, loyalty, or fear of consequence. Serene knows she should not feel attracted, a phrase heavy with internalized rules, social expectations, and self-surveillance. Yet the film gently exposes how loneliness can soften those defenses, how prolonged emotional isolation can make even carefully constructed boundaries feel unbearable. Charlotte's touch is described not in explicit terms, but as warmth and familiarity, emphasizing how intimacy between women often begins not with overt desire, but with comfort, shared history, and the need to be seen without judgment. As the two women give in to the moment, the film frames it less as an impulsive act, and more as a surrender to feelings that have been simmering beneath the surface, challenging the idea that queer intimacy is always deliberate or transgressive. For lesbian viewers, this scene resonates as an honest depiction of how emotional proximity can evolve into something deeper, especially in environments where women rely heavily on one another for support. It also reflects society's discomfort with women expressing love for each other, particularly when that love emerges from vulnerability rather than clear labels, because it disrupts tidy narratives about desire and control. Charlotte and Serene's interaction mirrors real-world pressures on queer women to justify their feelings, to label them prematurely, or to deny them altogether, and by allowing the moment to exist without explanation or moralization, the scene affirms that connection itself is meaningful. Ultimately, Scene 2 is not about betrayal or taboo, but about the human cost of repression, the quiet bravery of acknowledging desire, and the longing to be held when the world feels empty, offering viewers a reflection of themselves that is tender, complicated, and deeply real. Scene 3 centers on Serene as an emotional bridge and, quietly, an emotional catalyst, revealing how deeply she longs for harmony between the women she cares about, while also struggling with feelings she has never fully allowed herself to name. Her desire for Charlotte and Jane to get along is not about restoring order for convenience, but about preserving a sense of emotional safety within the shared space. A hope that if everyone can just talk, the fractures will stop widening. When Serene tells Jane, "You can tell me anything, I'll always be here for you," the sincerity in her words carries the weight of genuine care. The kind of care queer women often offer one another when they have learned, sometimes painfully, that the world is not always kind or understanding. For Jane, this invitation is both comforting and destabilizing, because Serene's presence makes it hard to focus in ways that go beyond friendship. Her closeness awakens a pull Jane has likely tried to ignore, one that sits at the intersection of trust, admiration, and unspoken desire. Jane's struggle in this moment reflects a familiar queer tension, the desire to confide fully in another woman while fearing what that honesty might reveal, not just to the other person, but to oneself. Serene represents emotional refuge, someone who listens without judgment, and that safety becomes inseparable from attraction, illustrating how intimacy between women often grows through shared vulnerability rather than overt pursuit. Jane's wish to lean in, to close the distance, exists alongside her need for guidance and reassurance, showing how queer desire can feel layered and confusing, especially when it emerges in spaces meant for support rather than romance. The scene remains deliberately restrained, allowing longing to exist without resolution, which challenges society's discomfort with seeing women's emotional closeness taken seriously instead of dismissed as harmless or platonic. That discomfort persists because acknowledging such moments forces recognition that women's bonds can carry depth, intensity, and desire independent of men's presence or validation. Serene's role becomes symbolic of the queer woman who is often positioned as the listener, the mediator, the one who holds space for others while quietly setting aside her own needs. And Jane's reaction highlights how difficult it can be to navigate attraction when it arises in relationships built on trust and care. For lesbian and broader LGBTQ+ audiences, Scene 3 resonates as a truthful depiction of longing that is felt but not yet spoken, of moments where the heart races not because of action but because of possibility, and of the delicate line queer women walk between emotional honesty and self-protection. Scene 4 brings the simmering conflict between Jane and Charlotte to a point of emotional reckoning, not through escalation but through exhaustion, as both women finally confront the truth they have been circling for too long. That the animosity consuming them is not rooted in hatred or incompatibility, but in unresolved tension, longing, and the fear of what acknowledging that truth might mean. Their constant friction has become unsustainable, draining not only them but the shared space around them. And the film frames this fatigue as significant, because queer women often live for years carrying emotional burdens that stem from repression rather than conflict itself. Jane and Charlotte's awareness that their fighting masks something deeper is quietly radical, as it challenges the idea that strong emotions between women must always be framed as rivalry, jealousy, or dysfunction, instead allowing room for the possibility that desire and connection have simply been denied expression. The language of wrongness that hangs over their decision is crucial, not as a moral judgment imposed by the film, but as a reflection of internalized shame, the learned belief that women's love for each other must be justified, hidden, or paid for in some way. By acknowledging this belief rather than endorsing it, the scene exposes how deeply societal discomfort with lesbian intimacy infiltrates personal relationships, turning attraction into guilt and closeness into conflict. When Jane and Charlotte finally choose to release this burden, the moment is framed not as reckless or transgressive, but as an act of emotional honesty, a refusal to continue punishing each other for feelings they did not choose but have long carried. For lesbian viewers, this resonates as a familiar crossroads. The moment when denial becomes more painful than truth, when the cost of repression outweighs the fear of visibility. Their connection in this scene is grounded in recognition rather than fantasy, rooted in shared history, mutual understanding, and the relief that comes from finally naming what has always been present. The film's restraint keeps the focus on emotional release rather than physicality, emphasizing that the true transformation lies in allowing themselves to feel without apology. This challenges society's persistent discomfort with women expressing love for each other, a discomfort born from patriarchal norms that trivialize female bonds or frame them as threatening when they step outside acceptable boundaries. Jane and Charlotte's choice mirrors the real-world pressure queer women face to minimize their feelings or frame them as mistakes, and by letting the moment exist without punishment or spectacle, the scene affirms that honesty is not wrongdoing. Instead, it presents connection as a necessary step toward authenticity, healing, and self-acceptance, offering viewers a reflection of queer love that is difficult, human, and deeply real.